Biodiversity is their hope. Biodiversity is their hope. We are very happy to welcome you all tonight at the Embassy of France of the United States to debate the subject. I'm Stéphane Roux, I'm attaché for science and technology, and I will master the agenda of this evening. When we decided to organize these French-American talks with our partner, the Smithsonian Institute, we ambition to foster global awareness on biodiversity. Despite a very critical situation regarding nature around the world, we aim to promote an optimistic approach. And it seems to me that there are already two good reasons to be optimistic, is that you came here tonight with a very large number of people, so it shows like an interest for biodiversity. And the second reason to be optimistic is that we had the honor and the chance to welcome His Excellency Philippe Etienne, Ambassador of France to the United States. Your Excellency, you just took your position this morning, and we are very honored. And then we are very honored that you can open this evening debate dedicated to biodiversity. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Dear Stéphane, dear guests, it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you to the Embassy of France for this French-American climate talk on biodiversity. And indeed, it's my first activity as a new ambassador of France in the United States. Tonight's distinguished speakers will seek to address a timely question: is there hope? So I don't think that my presence is any reason to be more hopeful, but there are indeed reasons to hope and to act. It's hard, of course, to answer positively when we know that 1 million animal and plant species are now at risk of extinction due to human activity, and that it threatens the very ecosystems people rely on for their livelihoods. That is the conclusion of the latest assessment by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Last month, experts from 132 countries came together in Paris and adopted the summary for policymakers of this landmark report. I was there with the French president when they came to give him the report. As such, with this report, with this unique report, they added a final note to a 3-year work that involved more than 500 scientists who analyzed 15,000 publications under the leadership of Sir Robert Watson. Sir Robert Watson is here, so I thank you very much for being here after we met in Paris. And he honors us with his presence tonight. There may be hope, however, if action is taken now. The IPBES report calls for transformation changes to restore and protect nature. A concerted international effort is therefore necessary, as no country alone will be able to counter the forecasts. That is why France has been committed to making biodiversity conservation a priority at the international level, on a par with climate change. At the end of 2020, China will host the 15th conference of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. The goal is to reach an international agreement that addresses the challenges raised by the IPBES, and we have been having a number of discussions, very high-level discussions with China to prepare for this very important conference. As I have said, France is committed to this effort. The day after the release of the report and the day he met the representatives of the IPBES, President Macron Macron announced priorities to better fight food waste and other waste. And my government made very ambitious announcements quite recently to change agriculture production methods and to combat the waste of raw materials. On May 23rd, the government announced at its first Environmental Defense Council meeting that a gold mining project in Guyana did not appear compatible with the requirements of biodiversity conservation. And the current French Biodiversity Agency will be strengthened and renamed the French Biodiversity Office. France is playing a leading role in this mobilization effort. Indeed, this is my first speech, as it was said, as ambassador in Washington, and it is maybe not a coincidence that it is dedicated to biodiversity. I can assure you, being also a G7 Sherpa, that under its G7 presidency, France is making biodiversity conservation a priority in the international fight against inequalities, which is the common denominator for our G7 presidency. At the same time, the IPBES scientists rang the alarm bell on biodiversity in Paris. The G7 environment ministers were meeting in Metz in the east of France, where they pledged to strengthen their country's commitments to preserving biodiversity and agreed on a chart which we will propose for adoption to the heads of state and government in Biarritz at the end of August on the G7 summit. But governments cannot do this alone. If we are to continue to hope, and if success is to become a reality, all actors must get involved. It's like for climate issues. The private sector must be encouraged to take real and concrete commitments. We need academia. We must work with indigenous peoples, with NGOs, with think tanks. To that end, France will also be hosting next year, in the middle of next year, the 7th World Conservation Congress of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. It will be another important milestone, bringing together a wide range of stakeholders involved in biodiversity conservation. As we saw on the road to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, it is vital for various actors in different arenas to work together to reach a comprehensive, ambitious agreement. For international negotiations to be successful, they must be supported by a growing momentum and a growing consensus at all levels. A scientific diagnosis, for example, is crucial to raising awareness. We are proud to welcome tonight Professor Thomas Lauvergeois. He has greatly contributed to this new awareness. He will be joined by other experts and scientists, some of whom traveled from France, representing the French Biodiversity Agency, the French National Center for Scientific Research, and the University of Montpellier, a leading global environmental research institution. The Franco-American climate talks on biodiversity, Fact B, that we have launched in the US and Canada, are part of this multi-stakeholder efforts to build political momentum at the international level. The goal of Fact B is twofold: to raise awareness among the public and decision makers in our 3 countries, and to step up exchanges of information between experts. Several Fact B conferences have already taken place in San Francisco and San Diego, as well in Vancouver, Canada. This evening marks the launch of a new series of conferences to be held on the East Coast, and we are happy to partner tonight with the world-renowned Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian has shown great leadership in biodiversity conservation. Today's event is under the banner of its Earth Optimism movement. The goal of this global movement is to shed light on the science-based solutions developed in the field of conservation by sharing innovative success stories. The idea is to focus on what is working and how best practices can be replicated and scaled up. Tonight is one more step toward building hope and optimism regarding our ability to take collective action to protect biodiversity. In just a moment, our panelists will be discussing how more people can become engaged in France, the US, and around the world in this common duty to preserve our common good. But first, let me thank all of you. As my colleague has said, your presence in large numbers tonight shows that there are indeed reasons for hope. Thank you for your attention and good work.
I will take the time to introduce Ruth Anastalk, who will moderate the panel tonight, because I think she was to say a few words about her. First, she loves France, so that's very important. Didn't expect that. Ruth is a co-founder and executive director of the very recent Smithsonian Conservation Commons. And she also has a long career dedicated to promote linkage between art and science. Previously, she has served in the Institute of International Education, for the USAID, for the International Council and Monument Inside, and also she has been advising a large number of conservation NGOs, so you are within biodiversity, Ruth, so I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Ambassador Etienne, and all of the staff of the French Embassy for your hard work in hosting this evening. We're really thrilled to be here. I also want to thank Britta Garfield. She's from the Smithsonian Office of International Relations, and she helped us put this panel together tonight and help prepare everyone. I'm very honored to present tonight's panel. Can I ask the panelists to come up to the front and sit here on the stage? And while they walk up, I'm going to have a few words I want to say about them. Well, first of all, I want to just give you a little rundown on the program. We've asked each panelist to give exactly 5 minutes, not more, of thoughts. 2 of them are going to show slides, the rest are going to just discuss. And then after this, we're going to have a discussion. I'll kick it off with, hopefully, a provocative question. And we're hoping to promote the spirit of le débat, which the French love so much. So we hope to have a vigorous discussion of these issues tonight. Altogether, this group possesses a big brain trust across decades, across global institutions, across the latest in thought and action about biodiversity research and conservation. We hope that you will find that their presence here tonight as a French-American team, along with their individual stories, represents a powerful response to the challenges and opportunities presented in the recent global assessment. It cannot be overlooked that if you read past the assessment's bracing projections, there is a world of possibility outlined too. I particularly enjoyed reading on I can't say I've read the mega statement yet, but I have read the summary, and I found the path forward defined and described very integrated and very inspiring. And I urge everyone here to read it. It's very exciting. But these speakers really do represent the global research and action enterprise that will bring positive movement to fruition. So I'm very proud to introduce them. Now, the bios of the speakers are in your event program, so I'm not going to tell you every little thing about each one. But I will just give a short intro to each one. I'll start with Dr. Tom Lovejoy. He was once my boss at the Smithsonian. But it's wonderful to have him here. In 1980, he actually coined the term biodiversity, biological diversity, and he drew up the first projections of global extinction rates for the Global 2000 report to the president. And I'm sure he'll be talking a little bit about that. And among his many achievements, he also founded the PBS series Nature, which is in its 38th season. So why don't you join me in welcoming Tom Lovejoy to the stage.
Well, thank you, Ruth, and thank you to the French Embassy, to France in general for this role it's playing for biodiversity. And I'd like to start also by thanking Bob Watson in the audience there, who led the intergovernmental panel that worked on the big biodiversity report. Because until that report came out literally something like 6 weeks ago, the plight of biodiversity did not make front page news. And there's something about an international process which is painful and laborious, and few people have the patience or the talent to do it as well as Bob Watson does. That takes a really important topic and elevates it so that it was, in fact, on the front page of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal when it came out. So, was the prospect of extinction of 1 million species a big surprise for those of us who work in the field? No, it was not. But what this report does is elevate it to a place where it can get the kind of attention it deserves. And the good news about biological organisms is basically they like to make more of themselves. As I like to say, thank God for sex, because that means that all these highly endangered species, if given a chance to reproduce as is their wont, we can actually be successful in preventing the vast majority of this potential wave of extinctions. So I think that's really sufficient for me to just sort of start this discussion, which I look forward to very much, but I can't resist being a little bit irreverent and say, you know, égalité, fraternité, biodiversité.
Next up, we have Surya Barnerias. He's head of international affairs for the newly formed Agency of Biodiversity in France. The ambassador mentioned this. It's only 2 years old, correct? Can you imagine getting to start a new agency for biodiversity in a country like France? And to live in Paris, too, would be nice. But there is an organization that's already achieving major policy wins, and they're also working with citizens in France, citizen science programs. Very fascinating development, and also I think they're going to be merging with another agency, which is fascinating to me all by itself, just the logistics of that. Anyway, Surya has also asked me to tell you he is a real lover of nature. He's a diver, a scuba diver, and he loves bringing people together from different disciplines and different walks of work fields. So it sounds like biodiversity is the right field for him to be in.
Thank you very much, Rose, for your kind words. And I must say that I'm very happy to be back in DC, where I lived for 2 years and a half, not very long time ago. I'm also very honored to speak, of course, after the ambassador and Thomas Lovejoy. And also because it's a special time for me, because of the long-time friendship between the USA and France, of course. And I also see a sign because some of you may know that on the 18th of June, 1940, the General de Gaulle called for goodwill people to resist. It was other time, other war, but I think it's a sign because we have to resist to the threats on biodiversity. So we have to have a general mobilization on that subject. So for me, it's also a special time to start these fact-be conferences. So just a few words on the French Biodiversity Agency, or the French Agency for Biodiversity, because that's the term we use in French. So as you said, it's a fairly recent agency created at the start of 2017. It's 1,200 people that work in the field in France, all over France, also in overseas territories, to protect biodiversity. So they do that, for example, by managing 10 marine nature parks all over France, and also in the Caribbean. They also monitor and protect freshwater, so streams, lakes, and that kind of ecosystems. The French Biodiversity Agency also tried to, as you said, to mobilize businesses and subnational governments by putting in front, and at the top, the best example that, because some of cities already started processes to improve their biodiversity. Recently, for example, the city of Paris declared that they wanted to recreate four urban forests in Paris. So we hope to see more trees in Paris in the coming years. We also support what we call educational marine areas. So those are areas where we bring kids from schools to teach them how marine ecosystem works, and also how we are supposed to manage marine areas in order to protect them for the long term. So it's not per se protected areas, but it's more, it has an educational purpose, and it really works well. It, by the way, came from the Pacific Islands of French Polynesia, so it's, we are also trying to get the best experiences from all over the world. So that's also an important reason for working with the US. As you mentioned, we will soon merge with the Wildlife and Hunting Office, so to create an agency of 2,500 people. So we hope that we will be more engaged for protecting biodiversity. And maybe one final word is to say that we work on with citizens on citizen science. So we count on people, citizens, every one of us in France to count, for example, butterflies and birds, and that's a very important way to better know biodiversity. And as you know, we can only protect what we know, and also it's a good way, of course, to mobilize citizens to better know their environment and monitor it, and maybe give the alarm when something is going on. So we are bringing our small rock to the building, and we hope to continue for a long time. Thank you.
And now I'm pleased to introduce somebody from the U.S. side, from the U.S. Scientific Institution, the Smithsonian, Dr. Adeline Harrison. She organizes people and technology to track species in a fast-expanding migratory connectivity project. She's a specialist in the marine movement by air and water, but she's really interested in everything on the planet that moves. She is also, she wanted us to tell you that she's especially glad that her science has been used in the United Nations efforts to create a new treaty for the ocean, which is in progress now. Like Surya, she likes to work across disciplines. And she said this literally to me yesterday. I think it's wonderful. She believes that the power of design, music, history, art, and technology have transformative powers to create a positive future for conservation. So Adeline, why don't you join me up here?
I don't need to say anything now because Ruth Anna said it all for me. It's really an honor to be here in just insanely esteemed company on this stage. So thank you for allowing me to share my perspectives on what's working and what's innovative in conservation. And so may I have my slideshow, please? One of the immutable features of our Earth is that it moves. It spins on its axis, creating patterns of night and day. It orbits around the sun, creating seasonal pulses of dark, wind, and ice, but also the microscopic phytoplankton in the ocean that converge through swirling currents to support our largest animal, the blue whale. And in response to these pulses, in the quest for food and water, Tom for good mating sites, and to avoid the times of the year with harsh weather, animals take Herculean adventures across our planet. They follow the movement and the breath of the earth. And so the earth moves, and animals move, but earth also moves us, people, to protect it. Earth moves us. At the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, I study and aim to conserve what I think is the most inspiring event on Earth. This is what moves me. The mesmerizing migration of animals to and fro across hemispheres, continents, countries, and oceans. Migrating animals connect all of us. They are global citizens. For the past couple of decades, I have studied migrating animals as a marine biologist. Fur seals on the beaches of a South African diamond mine, or seabirds 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and the migrations of leatherback turtles, one of the 14 species whose pathways are shown here across the Pacific Ocean. Leatherback turtles visit at least 32 countries during their migrations, including, you'll notice, the French island territories on this map. And while we are at risk of losing some of the species that I study, I am hopeful. Animal tracking data have had a huge impact on global policy. Last September, I presented my research on marine animal migrations at the United Nations negotiations to create a new treaty for biodiversity in the ocean. And I have used these data also to identify biodiversity hotspots as a part of the Convention on Biological Diversity process. And it's really all because of technology like this. This looks huge up on the screen, but it's really only this big, so you probably can't even see it in the back. So this is a small solar-powered satellite tag. This is my primary research tool to follow animal migrations. And while the technology is not exactly a conservation solution in and of itself, the information it provides gives us unparalleled insights into the secret lives of animals, insights that can help us better protect them. And the stories this technology allows us to share show just how connected we all are across borders. Stories like this. This is a beautiful shorebird that I studied called the black-bellied plover. You have them in France as well. They nest in the Arctic, and then they make these amazing migrations across oceans, continents, hemispheres. Before we started tracking their migrations just a few years ago, we knew virtually nothing about their movements. Now with these data, we know exactly which countries and important habitats are connected to each other. And this really improves our ability to work together to manage them. So what am I hopeful about? Every day I see how Earth moves us. I see how migrating animals connect us in a shared human experience, how technology is really revealing this and is providing us inspiring reasons to protect the Earth. You can see it in the faces of the school children visiting our bird banding station in Texas, where biodiversity is on full display in the spring as hundreds of birds pass through. Earth moves all of us. Thank you.
Now we're going to cross the ocean again to a distinguished French institution. The CNRS is sort of like a bunch of our agencies mashed together. It's massive. They have about 1,100, more than 1,100 labs all over the world. They're located in universities and also government labs. We were just meeting with them in Paris a few weeks ago, and they showed us a chart showing just how many joint publications exist in the last 10 years between Smithsonian scientists, including Autumn Len, and scientists in the CNRS, and it's quite, there were more than 1,500 publications in 10 years, and that's all that we knew of at the time. So there's probably a lot more. They looked it up by discipline. And anyway, Thierry Moulinier has joined us tonight. He just came over for these fact talks. And we're very excited that he's here. He's research director for the Center for Functional and Evolutionary Ecology at the University of Montpellier. And I would just say that it's comforting to know how our institutions do cooperate. And I hope you all will get more of that impression as we have our conversation tonight.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you to the Foreign Affairs Ministry in France for giving us the opportunity to have this night and the following nights in Chicago and Toronto. I'm also very happy to be back in DC, in the DC area where I did a postdoc about 20 years ago in an American research lab, which influenced very much my career after. And so I'll go through a few slides with you. First, why should we care about biodiversity? Why should we preserve biodiversity? Well, this is kind of obvious for most of you maybe in the room. But there may be many different ideas about that. There is some intrinsic value in protecting biodiversity. Some people may really think that biodiversity matters for aesthetic reasons, the fact that it just does exist in itself, that it's the fruit of a very long evolution. Each species or the combination of species in the ecosystems that we can live in or visit. And also, it provides critical services to humans, and this has been clearly stressed in the IPBES 2019 report and the threats that are pressing on biodiversity. Just to highlight a few threats that are identified, human-induced threats. Some are linked with climate change. Some critical ones are linked with habitat destructions. Humans are destroying habitats to live in, to exploit resources, over-exploit resources in the sea, on land. There is pollution that has strong negative effects in many ecosystems. And finally, invasive species have been also critically threatening and making some species disappear. What science does about all this? I'm a scientist in the field of ecology. I guess first we can document patterns. For instance, document extinction rates, document changes in population sizes in relation to different factors, some induced by human activity. We can also, very importantly, investigate the underlying processes, so the causes, the mechanisms that are responsible for those changes, and this may be very important to understand whether these changes will increase, how we might, in some cases, alter these effects. And so sometimes, through science, we can suggest or suggest solutions, and sometimes assess them and try to see whether they can actually work in the field. I'll just give a few examples of critical issues. One, for instance, is regarding the overexploitation of the sea. We have key scientists like Daniel Colli, originally born in France, who has come out with the notion of fishing down the food webs and basically human emptying the fish communities. A colleague of mine recently wrote a biography about this scientist, and I think it's this biography just came out, and I think it really kind of stressed the pressing issues of biodiversity and the timing and the role of some of these people, like some people we heard before, but also this kind of person who have played a critical role at documenting and at making the general public realize and the politicians realize the importance of biodiversity. Another example is just to show you some of you may have never seen a scientific paper. This is how part of it looks like. Nowadays, they have very long lists of international collaborators. This is, for instance, a study about unsustainable hunting of a species, the Ottoman bunting, which has been, for traditional reasons, eaten by French people in the southwest of France. And this study is detailed demographic, movement, and biochemical analysis is showing that this kind of hunting is not sustainable, but it should be stopped. And so this kind of study, very scientific, then can be taken in law and change the course of biodiversity and affect the potential extinction expectancy of some species. Just a third example, and this is work we have been involved in, relates to introduced species and disease, which even on a very remote island, far from any human settlement, can have strong impact on biodiversity. So this is the story of albatrosses, rats, and avian cholera, a disease of poultry that may have come by humans to this kind of islands. And so in some of these cases, some technical solution might potentially exist to remove the threat on some of these species, this yellow-nosed albatross on this Amsterdam Island in the south of the Indian Ocean, where we are trying to see whether we could use a vaccine or combine with the removal of the rats from the island to save some of these species. And so overall, just as a conclusion of this introduction, I just wanted to stress some broad issues in relation to some of the conclusions from the IPBES report, which talk about transformative changes that we need to do more generally in our society and individually as citizens. There is issues of education to biodiversity and critical thinking that are very important. The need to work at all scales, from our individual to broader international scales. And I guess I think it's really important, the need to work on changing what motivates people. If people are motivated to have big cars, this is not going to work eventually. If people somehow are more motivated to go in nice places, or at least watch pictures of nice places, aesthetically pleasing, and or knowing about biodiversity, if we change what motivates people and how people somehow show off or somehow compare themselves, this might go in the right direction. So just a line that I came out with, maybe people should be asking themselves when they consume, when they work, when they vote, whether this is good for biodiversity and the environment. So basically the issue of voting with either your credit card or in the ballots, and the issue of thinking all the time, each of us, at a different level, may be important to consider. So this is just some minor remarks on this.
Very inspiring comments, thank you. Final speaker tonight is Steve Momford. He is director of the National Zoo Conservation Biology Institute. He's also the chairman of the Smithsonian Conservation Commons, so therefore my boss. So he is, has done a lot of very interesting things in his career. He's an accomplished research veterinarian. A lot of people like to call him a double doctor because he's a vet and a PhD. He wants everyone here to know that he loves the desert, and he loves desert ecology. And in fact, I'll add to that that at a time when biodiversity hotspots, when people were mapping the world, they were kind of overlooking the desert. Steve and an international team founded the Sahara Conservation Fund. So he's put his love of the desert in action. He's also an avid bicycler. He also rides a motorcycle. Just wanted me to share that with you. And he loves mentoring students. So Steve Momford, why don't you come up here?
She made us tell her all that stuff. It's a real honor to be here tonight. tonight, and with such an esteemed panel and people who are great colleagues and friends. I had the opportunity last week, in response to the IPBES report, to testify in front of the House Science Committee, along with Robert Watson and a few other colleagues. And the committee hearing was entitled Nature in Crisis, Biodiversity Loss and Its Causes. It's only the third time I've testified. Robert told me that it was between 30 and 40 times that he'd done that, so it really wasn't fair, too easy for you. But I think what we all tried to do is explain to the House members in very simple terms, what do we mean when we talk about biodiversity? What are we speaking about? And ultimately what we're talking about is the very fabric of what we know as life on Earth, or nature, and all of its vital contributions to people and all the life that goes along with us. And I like to say that we're just inextricably linked to nature, and we can't separate ourselves from that, from biodiversity. We're one and the same in that equation. And if you try to explain to these members of Congress that what we're talking about is really fundamental things, every breath that you take, every drop of water that you drink, every bite of food you consume is in one way or another essentially interlinked with biodiversity and functioning ecosystems. It's really as basic as that. And over the next decade, we know there's going to be trillions of dollars worth of development going on in order to support a growing human population, a population that took 200,000 years to get to 1 billion, and only 200 to get to 8 billion. We're nearly there. And so, for example, just look at roads. By 2050, they expect to have perhaps as much as 15 million miles of new roads, enough to circle the planet 625 times. And so that may be in support of humanity, but if it's done incorrectly, there's no question that that sort of development is going to make sure that it continues to be the primary driver of animal mortalities, habitat fragmentation, species invasions, and even the spread of pandemic disease threats, the pathogens responsible for those. And all of those things are going to happen even before you add in climate change, or in addition to. So the IPBES report really does a fantastic job of laying out the threats. And what is a little bit overlooked in the report, I think, is that interventions are suggested that can lead to transformative change. And with Ruth Anna and other colleagues at the Smithsonian, I think there's something that we've learned is that we can basically flood our publics with information about the biodiversity apocalypse and how it's coming. But if we don't provide information about solutions, then people basically start to shut down, and they feel that there's nothing that they can do that will make a difference. And so we're trying to train ourselves to think about a solutions mindset, a new way of thinking about how we can mobilize solutions and focus on what's working and how we can do more of that. And so we decided to, Ruth Anna and I and a small group of people back in 2017, we decided to do something called Earth Optimism. And really it was, it's what we envisioned was this worldwide forum for sharing and stories and curating stories of conservation success. And the first meeting that we had here in Washington, there were a number of other events that were done around the world, but in Washington we were surveying our respondents, and 72% of the respondents stated that being surrounded by success stories, whether they were small or large, over this 3 days led to them taking action in their own lives and changing their behavioral practices. And so at our next summit, which is, we've been running these annually, but we're really going to have our next major event is going to be in 2020 on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And we have a pretty audacious goal of trying to reach 1 billion people with stories of success in 2020. It's a big year for biodiversity, and we think that we can be a big part of that, and you all can be a part of that with us. And so I wanted to share just a few things about why I'm optimistic. First of all, if you're in conservation as a field and you're not an optimist, then you need to get a therapist or something, or you're probably on medication. I don't know, but or both. Because it's really hard to look in the eye, every day and wonder, what is it we're going to be able to do? The environmental and human development agendas are just coming together in a very rapid way. I think what this report is showing us is that human development and biodiversity are so closely linked. We're piling on climate change on top of that. And so we feel like the Smithsonian and the CNRS and many of the other partners that we work with around the world have the ability to uniquely share information with their, and because they have convening capabilities like the Smithsonian does within our communities, we can create these meeting places for new ideas and actions using our collections and our research and our exhibits in a way that could be extremely powerful and will help us lead towards a transformation to a sustainable future. So I'm optimistic because the people I work with are incredibly inspiring. Look at Autumn Lynn, oh my God, great job. You know, I'm so proud of that sort of work, and it makes me optimistic because I know there are people coming up. I know that the problems we're trying to solve, if there's anything I've learned, is that they can't be solved in one person's lifetime or one person's career. And so ultimately what we're fundamentally trying to do is create this successive generations of knowledge, of new energized Earth optimists who can carry forward and carry on where we're going to leave off. And so, for example, Mary Hagedorn, one of my scientists, is a coral biologist. She created a whole new field of coral cryopreservation, and right now she's out. She can collect gametes at coral spawns, including in the French Pacific, and you can collect those gametes and you can freeze them, and she's actually shown you can not only freeze them, but thaw them and create new organisms, and we can start to collect the biodiversity that currently is being fragmented across reefs that are slowly dying or being under a threat from ocean acidification, and ultimately one day we may have an opportunity to reseed those reefs if we can get the climate change part right, but we have to do that now while there's still biodiversity to be collected. So she's an incredible example of optimism for me. I'm optimistic because of some of the scientists here, my colleagues that are here tonight that joined me with our colleagues to work on a magnificent scimitar horned oryx, a species that, like the American bison, once numbered in the hundreds of thousands of animals and ranged from Senegal all the way to Sudan, and by the mid-1980s they were extinct in the wild due to conflict and overhunting. And so working together with the Sahara Conservation Fund, which by the way has its base in Paris, and the Smithsonian and Sahara Conservation Fund, we convened a group of global partners to see what could we do to help save the species, to bring it back from extinction. And so we worked together. Unfortunately, there were large populations that were in zoos and private collections, but what was really unique is that we pulled together a partnership we've not had before, which was really working conservation organizations and zoos and university partners working with governments. The government of Abu Dhabi has become our primary sponsor, working with the government of Chad, and altogether we've managed to put the species back into the wild. I was there in 2016 and got to see, after 18 years of work, the first oryx to set foot on soil in more than 30 years. And now we have 165 oryx in the wild, and my team here in the front row, they're tracking these animals, every single one of them, every day, twice a day. It's downloaded on my phone, I can see where they're moving. We're trying to understand and reconstruct the ecology of the species and their life history that was never studied before they went extinct. This is incredible, and it makes me extremely optimistic. I mentioned it already, but I'm optimistic because of the brilliant minds that are coming to us and asking us, what can we do? They want to pick up where they want to be like us. They want to be conservationists. They love nature, and they want to do something about it. So, I'm really inspired by that. We formed a Smithsonian Mason School of Conservation, which works on that, and I know for sure that it's a life-changing opportunity for them. And ultimately, we're launching this entire new generation of Earth optimists out there, and they inspire me, and they would you too if you met them. So, the environmental problems we're facing are perilous, and we must have urgent action to meet those challenges. But they need to be backed up by rigorous science. And environmentalists, though, and conservationists and scientists, and even like-minded people, just talking to ourselves isn't sufficient to get to solutions. And so it's too much preaching to the choir. And so what we have to find out, these are win-win solutions, win-win for people and nature that requires us to really adopt sort of new standards of practice. And we need to recognize that integrating conservation and science into development practice is essential to finding success. It's good for our economies, it's good for our families, it's good for every global citizen on Earth because we all have a stake in biodiversity and sustaining a biodiverse planet. So ultimately, we have to stop being the outsider, and nature needs to have a seat at the table. needs to be there, not as an interloper, but as an existential partner. It's to have an opportunity to express the values and the benefits that it provides us today and into the future. Our common futures, our hopes, and our aspirations very much depend upon it, and we'd like to do it together. Thank you.
Okay, now the fun starts. So I'm going to start. I want the audience to ask questions of the panel, and I'm going to kick this off by asking them a question first to get everything warmed up. I wanted to talk to Tom Lovejoy first. The other day we were talking about this, and you were saying you were really glad that that the EPES assessment called attention to biodiversity, even if it was a little jarring. The headlines were pretty dire. But you also said that you thought it was not inevitable, and that these things would go extinct, that these species would go extinct or in such large numbers. Could you tell us, if we're going to turn this around, if we can turn this around, what will success look like?
So I think basically there's got to be a radical reorientation of how people perceive the planet on which we live. It has to be recognized that it is a living planet. There is the whole climate change issue is deeply involved with biology. There is as much carbon in the atmosphere from destroyed biodiversity as remains in extant biodiversity. So there are a lot of patterns of living that we just need to drastically change. But, the fact that there is all that excess carbon in the atmosphere from destroyed nature is actually also a plus in the sense that ecosystem restoration can pull it back. And the number is so big that we literally could get the whole climate burden of CO2 in the atmosphere removed and still have plenty of ecosystem restoration still to do. And that makes this something that is no longer this gigantic problem that what can I possibly do? Anybody can plant a tree. Anybody can help restore a wetland. And I think we need to get the kids out there because they understand this. And they can drag along some of the recalcitrant adults, who are being ostrich-like with their heads in the sand and getting sand in their ears, right? So I think there's just huge potential out there.
That's very encouraging. Charity, I'm going to pick on you next. So you mentioned some threads that Tom mentioned about sort of changing consciousness. Could you comment a little more about how we're going to be able to tell that we turned it around?
Well, for some threats, it's maybe going to be much easier than others. Like, as I mentioned, for some examples, for some specific species, we can really figure out whether the likelihood that they will get extinct is getting lower, depending on what we decide to do or what we do. So if we follow well, monitor well their demographic rate in the field, track individuals, try to see whether they actually go back to places where they used to go and the populations are recovering. So for some species or for some communities of species, we could document that and track that in terms of response of management decisions that we may take at different scales. And for other issues, it's maybe going to be much more tricky, especially at broad scale, especially when there is regime shifts that then can lead to other large-scale changes, not only in relation to the climate. Then it's maybe more tricky to know where we're going. Like, for instance, the notion of the balance of nature is not so, like, things are not balanced how we could think. In general, extinction exists and species are long time can arise. But comparing this natural situation with critical situation where there is the effect of human influence and potential management changes that we could take, well, this will, in some cases, pretty sure we can document that well, and in other places we'll see how we can try to work at improving things, and we'll see how it goes, and we should monitor that. And I guess for a lot of things, it's pretty obvious some of what we should do, or like in terms of stopping overexploitation and stopping destroying habitats and helping restoring habitats.
I think Surya, I'm going to pick on you now, but I mean, you're working in a new agency of biodiversity, and what is the role of that agency going to be in monitoring if we turn this around? How are we going to do that?
Yeah, so the role of the agency is to keep track of progress that we can make. So the agency, for example, is harboring a national observatory for biodiversity, so with a certain number of indicators that we follow, like number of species, population of birds, for example, and we keep track of that, and we hope that the trend will change and go better for some of these indicators. So our role is to monitor, to make sure that we make progress in the right direction.
And how will you share the information?
So we try to make, of course, it publicly available through website and annual reports that we produce also. And these reports are also presented to the government each year. So we try to make it publicly available as much as possible.
And are you tracking the interest of the French public in this information that you're sending out?
Yeah, so we have a part that is really on biodiversity, conservation, and trends in species, and we also have a part on pressures and threats on biodiversity. And the final part is in the citizen mobilization, public involvement, how people perceive biodiversity. So yeah, we have also a part on all the social society part of biodiversity conservation.
That's great. Autumn Lynn, what is your answer to the question of how we're going to know we've turned things around?
Well, I actually feel that for the oceans, I'm seeing it right now. That when I started my PhD in 2005, the technology was still, quite new, about 10 years old, and suddenly we were able to see what animals in the oceans did. We knew there were impacts, and we knew, in a general sense, where those impacts were happening, incidental catch of seabirds by fisheries, for example, but we couldn't get the data on the fisheries. And in just the past few years, suddenly, around the world, data sets are being made available for us to use and see in a transparent way what is happening in the ocean. In the ocean where we can't go, where it's too deep, where it's too far away, the technology serves as our binoculars, our ability to see what's happening. And because of all of this wealth of information that we have been able to record over the past couple of decades, this has really led to the mandate, the momentum to create a new treaty for the ocean, which was just a dream during my PhD, and now 15 years after I started my PhD will happen. And I've been contributing data to that process for a long time now, and I think it's made me aware of how long sometimes that transformative change does take, and to observe when it happens may take a little while, so not to get disheartened, but seeing this treaty process move forward in the United Nations, seeing people collaborate around the world with data that helps us better manage species and really transform ocean conservation, to me the success is starting to happen right now.
Cool. How about you, Steve?
I was thinking you were going to ask me that. First of all, I heard somebody speak over the weekend, and they talked about the environment in patriotic terms, and I really, I think for a lot of people listening, resonated. And this idea that if we're trying to conserve the environment, that in the United States, for example, you know, that's an act of patriotism, that conserving our country, conserving our natural resources, and honoring that as part of our fundamental fabric of our country is something that somehow has been lost in the last decades. There was a time when parties from both sides of the aisle would pass things like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. So somehow or another, biodiversity has to be seen as being a fundamental and essential value in our culture. It's something that is a benefit to humankind, benefit to our families, benefit for our children. And to me, that shouldn't be, you know, I don't understand why we can't seem to penetrate that idea, that it's not about left or right, it's about survival, it's about thriving, it's about our economies, it's about our security, it's about our health, it's all of those things. And we seem to just have a hard time getting that message through in a way that isn't threatening. I mean, success to me would look like conservationists and policymakers and corporate sector people sitting together around the table. When the day comes when the conservation person or the environment person is sitting at the table and nobody notices, that'll be success. That it becomes just a fundamental aspect of what one needs to do to run a company, to run a government, and to have good quality of life. So to me, that is success. And another part of success for me would be, we have lots of institutional capacity in the West, but the sectors don't know how to work together. So we have all parts of the world who don't have any institutional capacity in these areas. They need our help desperately. They need some forms of aid, of knowledge transfer, of a way to help them help themselves. And so that would be, when I start to see, you know, working in Chad, when I can recruit a student that can come and to a Western university or rise up to be a senior manager in that organization, then I know that's going to be success in that context. So I think we have, you know, we have so many things we could improve on, but to me, we have a long way to go to create the right kind of institutional frameworks and also the kind of collaborative frameworks that are needed to be successful.
That's wonderful. I think wanted to give an opportunity to the audience to ask questions or make comments. Heard there would be mics passed around.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up with Adeline Harrison, because you give a very optimistic perspective on oceans, and I have a very negative feeling about it, especially with the very abundant amount of plastics that we're consuming on a daily basis. I feel terrible about it on my own level. So it doesn't really click with me when you tell me that this is an advance. I know that on a research level it is, but I think we're really behind, and I wanted to see what your feedback would be on that.
Thank you for the question. I think that is the reality, that in the IPES document, you search for the word success and it appears 6 times. The word transform appears 34 times. I think with plastics in the ocean, we're not at success and we're starting to transform. But what I am optimistic about is that I'm really seeing the mandate for changes on consumption and plastics happening from the youngest citizens on up. And so I think that you're right, plastics in the ocean and the transport of plastics from the land to the ocean is nowhere near success yet. And the idea of really mainstreaming biodiversity into all levels and transforming at the highest levels, I think this is what it's going to take for plastics, really changing our value system and creating a mandate for change. So I do agree with you. My perspectives on the topics I spoke on tonight were very optimistic, but I also see the reality and am disheartened by it, and we see it in the animals that we catch when they are full of plastics. And so, yes, this is a major issue that I hope this mandate is just
scenario as the chair of IPBES. Let me give you a very different perspective rather than talking about whether species are recovering. What we need to see is the 5 direct drivers of change stop changing. We've got to stop converting our ecosystems and restore them. We've got to stop exploitation and make the exploitation sustainable. We have to reduce the pollution levels of all pollutants. We need to clearly try and limit, and indeed stop, climate change. And we have to arrest the invasion of invaded alien species. So when we start to look at those 5 indicators, if we can show that we're reducing the pressure on ecosystems, that gives me some hope. We also, though, have to look at the drivers of those direct changes, and that's population and economic growth, where we need to reduce per capita consumption, especially in the rich, developed countries. We also need to transform and evolve our economic system. We've got to recognise that nature is valuable and should be taken into account when we have accounting systems. We've got to get rid of perverse agricultural subsidies, energy subsidies and transportation subsidies. We need incentives for sustainable production and sustainable use. We need to embrace a circular economy. So rather than look just at the biological system, which is important, and I very much agree with what the panel's saying, we need to really stress what the drives of change are and change the way we look at this. And so what do we mean by transformative change? We need to change the way we change. That is to say, we have to be holistic, we have to have very different agricultural systems, very different ways of producing energy and consuming it. Think about the way our diets, etc. So I would look also not just at the biological system and is it responding, but why are we causing change?
So just to give a little detail to what Bob was talking about the food and land use trajectory, it is perfectly possible to feed an adequate diet to the current population and the coming billions without destroying another square inch of nature through a combination of eliminating food waste, changing diets in the ways our doctors are telling us to anyway, and a few selected other interventions in the system. But it's a big, complex, sloppy process, and we've got to get hold of it.
It's great. I thought I saw someone down here in the front. She's been raising her hand since the beginning.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Li Yang. I appreciate all your effort for the ecosystem and try to improve not only the earth but the population. But the problem is that I also heard the government and the partnership. It's not saying that individual or business sake or the partnership, you can sort of evaluate the input and output in some kind of proportion. But the problem now is that when you put a government, public-private partnership together, it's really abused, legalized, and normalized extreme fraud and crime network. That means including murder and racial profiling and police brutality. So that create all kind of system problem and including elections. So everything is a profit over people. So I just wonder, you can have a government collaboration, you can have government grant or fund, and as traditional always have this has been government money that we really have a tremendous effort to do something. But if you put a PPP together, it's a total difference. If from the Rockwell City Town Center project, that's extremely abuse. It's not limited to the one project, it's expanded to the whole system wide. And the same as the National Academy of Science, there are conspiracy with police, with government attorney, with poor personnel. So this will create a lot of problem and mass incarceration and poverty. Everything is by this pattern of PPP. So I would like to recommend that you forget about PPP. Just see how are you going to make contribution, and if you can have private, you can have a lot of wealthy people. They also love run the government, but if they have money, they can have a contribution. So you use those money, you can solve the problem. And while the government, if they create a budget deficit, we would rather they put the money in for resolve the problem of poverty and all our government problems. So I hope you understand what I mean. This is a serious problem that almost every agency now, the whole system-wide, including from local to federal to global, and they don't allow people to come in. So I just wonder if you can really, solicit the public comment, because now public comment is not allowed to talk, and the website is not allowed to do this.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to comment on this? I mean, this is an interesting problem, the whole business of how we treat humans in this picture, and public-private partnerships. Anyone want to comment on that? Or
I think it's really important to take into consideration that we cannot make transformative changes against people. I mean, we have tried in France to increase, for example, taxes on petrol, I mean, on gas, and we have seen that, yeah, if you don't involve people enough, then you have a reaction. So I think it's really an important point to say that you cannot make transformative changes against people. So that's something we all have to take into account.
anyone else?
Well, I guess, yeah, you're putting you're highlighting a critical point of which you already somehow mentioned, is that yeah, people have to realize that their behavior and matters, and so the behavior of people who have more money and the behavior of people who are working to produce mostly money and not necessarily to protect biodiversity or to help other people. And so some actually, well, these are critical political issues. Maybe some companies are mostly there to make money, and some other companies are there to make money to pay their salaries, the salaries of their employees, but not only that. And so, yeah, these issues are important and have to be discussed. And maybe if we make, as I was trying to say, changing values, if people realize that it's better to actually behave even as a private company more to produce good values and to protect biodiversity than to focus on making more money, which basically make more consumptions and which goes in the not necessarily the right direction. I guess that's would be my take on this.
We have a lot of hands up here. Let's see. Start on this side.
Well, one of the things that really intrigued me about this passion is what governments are already doing. So in terms, I guess this is for everyone, but what do you think that we in the United States and our regulatory agencies, from EPA to Fish and Wildlife and research there, can learn from the French system and the French Biodiversity Agency?
That's a good one. Who's going to take that one? Yeah.
The French agency.
French Biodiversity Agency will not comment.
Talk other scientists after.
No, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, we can learn on both sides. So, but what we're trying to do is to integrate agencies, so to gain strengths. So maybe that can be, and also to integrate, to to have a more holistic approach, as Bob Watson mentioned. So that's also something we will try to do. So to work with businesses, to work with citizens, to work with subnational governments, to promote also agroecology. So more ecological approach of agriculture. So that's something that we can do with this type of agency that has a broader spectrum. That, I mean, I don't know if that's a lesson, because also that's something I learned when I worked in other countries. You always have to adapt to the culture and to how people work in that country. So I don't know if you can do directly the same thing.
Yeah, again, I guess in France, the importance of Europe is also quite important, and some laws are passed as European laws, and then come to the different countries, and have had very strong beneficial effects on protecting biodiversity, protecting habitats, and protecting species. And I guess in the US too, sometimes some laws are there to protect these species or these other species, but this is, we have to also be careful. Then I'm talking just about species and habitats, and not the whole, like, really transformative approach that needs to clearly be taken, which requires really dramatic changes.
Well, I was going to say that we have plenty of agencies in the U.S., federal government agencies, that have people who know what to do and how to do it and so on. But absent strong leadership, from the top of our country, change isn't going to happen as fast as we would like. So to the point that you made earlier, people need to be woke when it comes to selecting leadership that will support the values that you care about. And we've seen that if you're on the losing end of that, there are consequences. And I think we have really a lot of fantastic agency employees, people who know how to do the right thing, want to do the right thing, and they have to be enabled to do that.
So I think we actually have not touched on one of our greatest allies in this effort, which is the inspiration that can come from exposure to nature itself. And Steve, is head of the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. The number of people who go to zoos and aquaria every year is greater than all major sports events combined. So that says something about sort of the intrinsic interest, maybe more on the part of young people than their parents. But I think we need to pull people away from social media distractions, or take over the social media so they become green and biodiverse.
That sounds like a great solution. I can't see the audience, so I hope someone.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel. My name's Kat. I'm the leader of Small Scale OA, creating a data economy to incentivize coastal resiliency. My question speaks to this idea of data sets becoming available. It's really cool to see lots of collaborations and partnerships and initiatives to put as much information out there as possible. It seems like I lose track of the number of folks trying to create some sort of mobile app for doing fisheries, or the latest MPA network, or the latest tree on ocean conservation in the high seas, and like conserving deserts, and there's just so many different things. Each of these have their own data sets and public available repositories. It starts to become confusing and redundant for someone who's trying to create systemic change when each of these initiatives start to happen of their own with whatever cohort of money and like knowledge that brings these people together. Can you speak to how we can consolidate this information or get it to flow and feed into our decision making in a way that we won't then quibble about where the data came from, and also make sure that we have equity and like the access and the people who are participating in gathering that information?
That's intense.
It's a great question, and movement data is an example where, everyone here is being tracked as we speak, probably. But there's billions of data sets being accumulated, data points, and we're struggling with how to manage that. But one example is called Wildlife Insights, and everybody started doing camera trapping some years ago. And at the Smithsonian, we were no different. We had a program called eMammal, and pretty soon, the citizen science program, pretty soon we had 6 million images to manage. And we looked around the community and we found out that every conservation organization was having the same experience. And so in one of the first examples, I've seen a real collaboration around this topic. This program called Wildlife Insights seeks to create a platform for sharing this kind of data, this photo imagery data. And that data would be shareable at different layers, everybody from free access to more limited access, depending on the research project and what your data permission that you might give if you were a contributor. But this is coming together on should be hopefully a global platform that will create free access to people. And we can also then layer on top of that, in addition to movement data, you put sound data, lots of different, a data sharing platform is absolutely needed in this day and age. And so we're moving in that direction. It's exciting.
Just going in that direction, and as you mentioned, that you had federal employees that do their jobs and that know how to do their job. 20 years ago, when I did my postdoc at USGS Biological Division, we were working on the National Breeding Bird Survey data that was collected by volunteers, and that was managed by Tax and Wildlife Research Center, and all was on the web. That was 20 years ago, and we were actually working on pretty complex statistics to estimate local extinction rates and to relate that to habitat fragmentation of the forest. And that was amazing that this was available and that this allowed us to go forward with the techniques and also with the results showing a negative effect of habitat fragmentation and deterioration. And this was based on things that happened in the US, and actually as a French, I was quite impressed at that time that this was all freely available and linking clearly government people who had set up the whole system to make the data available, but the data was coming from the public. And when you in France, sometimes we think this is the country where the state and the people are in power, and maybe the US is more seen as a private place where the private sector. And I was quite impressed that this was federal government. Just an example.
I'll add something really quickly. An acknowledgement of the question. You characterize this challenge perfectly for practitioners to identify the repository of the moment. As scientists, we struggle with this as well and wish that there would be more guidance on who floats to the top and what's, if these tools are actually being used and are they useful. And I'm involved in a process right now that I think it will be useful because it is driven from the top, from the United Nations, saying we need a central place where we can click a button and generate a report. Here are our policy needs. And this motivation has resulted in really some of the most recalcitrant individuals that don't usually share data actually contributing them to this process. So it's hard because I think scientists are very protective of data, and that is what causes the wheel to continue to be reinvented. Streams of money, and I want to own this project, but I have seen it work, and I just acknowledge that this is a challenge, and I think requires some transformative change amongst ourselves as well.
I've been told we're running out of time. I want to thank you all. Great comments and questions. I want to give the panelists one more chance to make a final comment. I think that I'm standing between you all and a glass of wine, so. But Tom, who wants to go first?
So I think everybody should leave this, very interesting and lively discussion with the intent to find at least one person to enlighten about biodiversity.
I think of this as being as working along a continuum, trying to solve this problem. I won't be solved by me. It might be solved by somebody here or somebody here's children, or so we have to have this idea that we're in for the long haul. You know, this is not. People often say, we have a slogan that says we save species, and then I have to ask myself, well, when do we say we saved it? And it's you know, we're never going to save something truly. We have to work on it. This will be a work that we will always have to do. The environment will need to be stewarded by us, by human beings, and so I wouldn't be discouraged too much, you know, because if you're not optimistic about humanity, well then, you know, you can think pessimistically. I happen to be an optimist because I believe that in the power of the human being to find solutions, and ultimately we're going to do things that are in our self-interest, and the environment and its sustainability is in our self-interest, so I believe ultimately we will figure it out.
The issue of self-interest is very interesting, I think, because we have to maybe change the interest of the people. That it's, what is self-interest? If it's your family, if it's the people around you, if it's the scale of the earth. And this is a philosophical kind of question, but this is a critical one. That's what I was trying to say with my idea of that. Maybe we should just change the scale where people measure themselves, and they should stop measuring themselves by the size of the car or the amount of money they have on their bank account, and somehow we should change that maybe to more cultural values. The person who knows very well all the paintings that have, like to really change, because somehow humans are scaling themselves, and we are the fruit of a long evolution, and we can understand why some of us are trying to look better than others and so on. And maybe if we change the scale, how we compare ourselves, that could help. But of course, there's plenty of other stuff to do.
I will take the accusation of being an optimist and wear it pretty proudly, I think. But even in the face of what can be really devastating, because I really love nature and I have been sad to see things that I love disappear. I think what is heartening for me is seeing this change in how we are currently viewing human diversity, cultural diversity, the importance of different perspectives, cultures, views, people in our society to us every day. And I think if we put biodiversity into that same framework, how important diversity is, not just human diversity, but also biodiversity, and think of it as absolutely critical to our well-being. That's the value shift, I would really like to see.
So, nothing, I would just repeat that it's time to change, and we have at least 2 cards in our hands, so the credit card and the voting card, so do not forget that.
To say something.
So what I understand from the debate tonight is that it looks like we have some reason to be optimistic. There are some pathways which will make that there will be a biodiversity conservation. There are some pathways. And but what I understand is that everybody has to be involved. That's one of the messages that you mentioned tonight. And I think there is this reason to be optimistic is that to be involved is maybe the first step to be involved is to be here tonight, to listen to scientists who are going to explain what science can produce. And so that's already the first step that a lot of you have been doing tonight, being here, listening to the expert and the science results. So I think I would like to congratulate, of course, the panelists, but also all of you for being here and being involved, doing the first step tonight. So. And I just invite everybody to go in the room behind. We will have wine and cheese, which will help to go on with the discussion with our experts who are here. I'm sure they will be willing to go on with the discussion with each one of you. So thank you. I would like to mention that organizing an evening like that is usually that people being involved. So I would like to thank Rita, who is here.
way, where are you?
Thank you.